I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to another healthcare provider, Dr. Marionette Miller-Meeks, who's worked hard to improve the lives of many throughout her career.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague, the Honorable Representative Rogers, for yielding me time. I rise today in opposition of 8296. The Supreme Court recently took the important and correct step to return the power to regulate abortion back to state legislators and voters within the individual states while recognizing the sanctity of life. This concept is so novel and repugnant to the Democrats that they would put forward a radical and extreme abortion bill that would permit abortion even up until birth for any reason. Only 7 countries, including China and North Korea, are this extreme. As a doctor, I am knowledgeable that mid to late-term abortion is a barbaric procedure which can include dismemberment of the baby and crushing of the skull. Far more cruel than many of the laws of states that define prisoner abuse of convicted felons and what constitutes animal cruelty. A procedure done when the mother is given anesthesia, but the baby can feel pain, even though you cannot hear it scream. When it can respond to music and respond to touch or the voice of its mother. We wouldn't allow animals to be treated this cruelty. And Democrats think that this elevates women and is compassionate. I would like to also ask to be entered into the record this article from the Charlotte Lozier Institute.
Without objection.
I ask all my colleagues on every seat in every aisle of this chamber to vote against this extreme and radical and cruel abortion bill, H.R. 8296. Thank you. I yield back my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield now a minute and a half to the gentlewoman from Minnesota, Ms. Craig, a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee.
The gentlewoman is recognized for a minute, 30 seconds.
Exactly 3 weeks ago, 5 justices on an activist, extremist Supreme Court handed down a decision that upended nearly 50 years of precedent and rolled back fundamental rights for millions of Americans. In the weeks since, I have watched in horror as state after state has triggered laws that now forbid a woman or a girl from accessing an abortion, even in the case of rape and incest. These events have been shocking to Americans, not only for millions of women across this country, but for the country as a whole. You call yourselves conservative. We're talking about 50 years of precedent in our nation, because no government has a place interfering in the decisions between a woman and her doctor, criminalizing abortion, or restricting women's health care options. This is not a controversial position to the American people. A strong majority of my constituents believe that the right to an abortion should be protected by law. This is a freedom and a privacy issue. And the government, not politicians in this room, not politicians in any state in our nation, should have any part in this conversation at all. This is a very personal decision between a woman, her family, her doctor, and her faith. I encourage all of my colleagues to join me in voting yes to protect Roe today. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I reserve.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield a minute and a half to Dr. Schreier from Washington State, also a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee.
The gentlewoman is recognized for a minute, 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll tell you, my constituents are up in arms. They are emailing and they are calling my office outraged that the freedoms that they have had for 50 years are being stripped away from women in half the states in this country. They are furious when they hear about victims of rape not being able to end a pregnancy, when they see a 10-year-old girl who has to flee to a neighboring state so she won't be forced to carry a pregnancy to term, a 10-year-old. This is barbaric. And my constituents are worried about what might come next in our home state of Washington. I am the only pro-choice woman doctor in all of Congress. In fact, a pediatrician. And I have been in the exam room with teens facing unplanned pregnancies and with mothers who find out that the pregnancy they are so excited about is not a viable one. These are deeply personal circumstances, and frankly, when and whether and under what circumstances to become a mother is the single most important decision a woman will ever make. And that must be hers to make. The government has no place in the exam room. Today, I'm voting to make sure that every woman, no matter where she lives, can access abortion, to plan their pregnancies, protect their health, and chart the course of their lives. And I want my constituents to know that I will fight every day to protect their rights. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Please yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey who spent his life defending the voiceless. Gentleman from New Jersey, Chris Smith.
Thank my good friend.
The gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Ranking member for her eloquent defense of the unborn child and their mothers, because there are two co-victims in every abortion, mother and baby, and I thank her for her leadership. It's extraordinary. Madam Speaker, according to the January 2022 Marist poll, only 17% of Americans believe that, quote, abortion should be available to a woman anytime she wants one during her entire pregnancy. And when Americans were asked in late June, June 28th to 29th, in a Harvard-Harris poll, a nationwide poll supervised by Mark Penn, and many of us know him. He's a very, very effective pollster. And the question was put, do you think your state should allow abortions up to 9 months? Only 10% said yes. H.R. 8296 will legally authorize and enable the violent death of unborn baby girls and boys by dismemberment, beheading, forced expulsion from the womb, deadly poisons, or other methods at any time and for any reason until birth. Don't believe it? Read Section 4 of the bill. Couldn't be clearer. This bill is far outside the American mainstream and goes far beyond Roe versus Wade. And matter of fact, when the Harvard-Harris poll asked whether or not we should be doing what we're doing today in terms of Congress, they found, and I was a little bit astonished by this, that less than a third voters say that abortion law should be federally set by a congressional vote, 31%. They believe the states ought to be doing it. Let me ask you, point out to my colleagues, because mention was made of this, abortion is not health care. Unless one construes the precious life of an unborn child to be analogous to a tumor, to be excised, or a disease to be vanquished. This legislation constitutes an existential threat to unborn children. Since Roe versus Wade, approximately 63.5 million babies have been killed by dismemberment, chemical poisoning, and beheading, a number that equates with the entire population of everyone living in the country of Italy. If enacted, this bill would nullify almost every pro-life restriction ever enacted by the states, including parental involvement laws in 37 states and pain-capable unborn child protection laws in 19 states. I remember when a woman from Virginia who formed a group called Mothers Against Minors Abortion, she found out about her daughter's abortion when she was hemorrhaging in her bed. She came and testified before the committee and said, please, we need to know. Parental notification laws do work. And sadly, these will be nullified by this bill. For decades, abortion advocates have gone through extraordinary lengths to ignore, trivialize, or cover up the battered baby victim. But today, thanks to ultrasound, unborn babies are more visible than ever before. Today, science informs us that birth is an event, albeit an important one, but only an event in the life of a child. It's a continuum, life is. I ask my colleagues to oppose this bill. The youngest patients need protection.
I reserve.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1.5 minutes to the gentlewoman from New Hampshire, Ms. Custer, member of our committee.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in support of the Women's Health Protection Act and to speak for the generation of women who have lost their freedom to make health care decisions for themselves. The government has no place inserting itself into people's personal health care decisions. I never expected to be on the floor of the House talking about miscarriage, ectopic pregnancy, or fertility treatments, but here we are. For many, pregnancy is not an easy path. 1 in 8 pregnancies end in miscarriage, and 1 in 50 women experience ectopic pregnancies, an outcome that always leads to pregnancy loss and poses serious risk of life to the mother. For countless others, getting pregnant requires costly, exhausting, and complex procedures such as IVF. Regardless of the circumstances, reproductive health is private. Pregnancy can be unpredictable. The government has no place deciding what care patients can receive and doctors can administer. Like all health care, decisions surrounding reproductive health should be between a patient and their doctor. As an adoption attorney, I worked with hundreds of birth mothers making the most personal, consequential decisions of their lives, and not one of those women looked to the government to make that decision for them. I support the Women's Health Protection Act, and I urge my colleagues to vote yes. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I reserve.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Madam Speaker, can I inquire how much time remains on both sides?
The gentleman from New Jersey has 13 minutes. The gentlewoman from Washington has 16 minutes.
Thank you. I would yield now a minute and a half to the chairwoman of our Health Subcommittee, Ms. Escher from California.
The gentlewoman is recognized for a minute 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Speaker, I rise in the strongest support possible of the Women's Health Protection Act. In February of 2020, I held the first legislative hearing in 2 decades to protect access to reproductive health. Since then, we've seen the steady rollback of abortion rights in Republican-controlled states. This means that low-income women and minorities have been living in a post-Roe reality for years now. Now, the Supreme Court has fully revoked the constitutional right to an abortion, leaving states to outlaw and criminalize abortion if they choose to. This devastating decision has created a patchwork of states with differing laws and restrictions, causing societal chaos and confusion across our country. It's a hunt down of women. It's a hunt down of women. The Women's Health Protection Act makes sure that every American has equal access to reproductive health care, no matter where they live. I'm eager to vote for this legislation once again, and I call on my Senate counterparts to codify these vital protections into law. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to yield to 1 minute to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, and another medical provider, Dr. John Joyce.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentlewoman for yielding. I rise today in opposition to this legislation that would legalize abortion on demand up until the moment of birth. As a physician, I first swore in an oath to do no harm. As legislators, we cannot in good conscience vote to pass legislation that would claim the lives of unborn children in late-term abortions. This poorly written legislation would put our nation alongside countries like China and North Korea by allowing discriminatory abortions based on sex, based on race, even based on disability. This is unacceptable, and it's gut-wrenching that Congress would even consider passing such legislation. This Abortion on Demand Act would override pro-life laws passed in our states and prohibit state-level elected officials from passing legislation to protect unborn children in our communities. It is time for all members of Congress to vote against this poorly written bill. May I have 30 more seconds?
Yes. I yield the gentleman 30 additional seconds.
The gentleman is recognized.
It is time for all members of Congress to vote against this poorly written bill. I urge a no vote. Madam Chair, I ask you to enter the text of 2 articles into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield a minute and a half to the gentlewoman from California, who is co-chair of the pro-choice caucus.
The gentlewoman is recognized for a minute 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for yielding and for your work and for bringing this bill to the floor. And a moment to thank our good friend, a great leader, Congresswoman Judy Chu, for her persistent leadership. Once again, Chairman Pallone, for bringing this to the floor once again. Last month's Supreme Court devastating. I remember the days before Roe. And now that the court has ended Roe, we are truly in a health emergency. Abortion bans affect everyone, but they're barriers to care, who already have these barriers presented. Women of color working to make ends meet, rural people, young people, for exercise. That is wrong. It's morally wrong. Care and health and about their futures. Liberty away. This is just another step in the erosion. Critical than now that we pass legislation to protect the right to access, ensure that abortions and comprehensive reproductive health care are available.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized. Is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield now a minute and a half to the gentleman.
The gentleman is recognized for a minute 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Roe became, for my entire adult life, the right to abortion care, to privacy, and the freedom and health care decisions was guaranteed in all 50 states. It sickens me. Is not the case. My granddaughters and all women and girls have been stripped of human rights, relegated to. Republicans have fixed the Supreme Court with a few judges seated by an and they now behave not as constitutional lawyers. Turning Roe and sending a woman's reproductive freedom to state politicians largely. These justices have decided their faith should determine everyone's constitution. This is a call to the chamber, to this chamber, to the Senate. Restore, expand, and protect rights. We must pass laws that combat this. That's why we're here yet again, with legislation to codify the right to abortion. Last September, the House passed the Women's Health Protection Act, and the Senate sat on its hands. Today, we must pass it again. Session with Representative Chu and many others as we pass until we protect and expand rights.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
I thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to yield a minute and 30 seconds to the gentleman from Indiana, Dr. Larry Bouchon, who understands what amazing technology is doing to save lives.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute 30 seconds.
Thank you for your yielding. Madam Speaker, I rise today in opposition of 8296. First, I'd like to say as a physician, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle need to focus on what their bill really does. Stop talking about ectopic pregnancies, which are a surgical emergency, fetal demise, where for unknown reasons the fetus has passed away, and miscarriages, which clearly also in many cases are surgical emergencies and are tragic. That's not what this bill is about. I have heard claims the bill only codifies provisions of the now overturned Roe v. Wade decision. That's simply not true. H.R. 8296 would create a national standard to allow abortions at any time up until birth. As a practicing heart surgeon for 15 years prior to coming to Congress, I operated on children in the neonatal intensive care unit as young as 23 weeks gestation. And even at 650 grams, or 1.4 pounds, and about 6 inches long, I saw life in my tiny patients' little bodies. This Abortion on Demand Until Birth Act bill doesn't only allow abortions at any point in a pregnancy, it would also preempt and repeal state laws that require informed consent, ultrasounds, or other testing and counseling before undertaking an elective abortion. The American people deserve to know the facts about what's really in this bill. I find it troubling the supporters of this bill, most of whom have never taken care of a patient, continue to mislead about what constitutes
Gentleman's time
healthcare.
has expired.
Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman from
I have to the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute 30 seconds.
The pain stripped of their rights and being thrust into legal limit decision. And doctors consult with lawyers on operating treatment of the 10-year-old child, a victim of media aspect of the doctor who provided her care being subject. We know this. These appalling stories reinforce the fact that denying care has circumstances far beyond what the slogans that have been bandied around. I've been able to make progress. Path forward. This legislation does that. We owe it to progress, access to this government intrusion into the most sensitive. Our rage, and I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from Washington.
Thank you, Madam. Defender of life. Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Walberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I say that sincerely. My heart breaks. Colleagues on the other side of the aisle who disregard the fact that we're talking about life, about the need for the same babies we're talking about. We've heard our speaker many times today. It breaks my heart to think that my colleague before life is hard to think that we don't hold the men accountable. It breaks my heart that we would say this is a human right to take life. Declaration of Independence brought us into being with unalienable liberty. We're better than this. We've had 50 years. Think about we applauded life. Madam Speaker, and for individuals capable of to decide for the place on earth today, board nursery in a hospital. Is a bill of death.
Time
Do
has
what
expired.
we must.
Yeah,
The gentlewoman reserved is recognized for a minute.
In this critically important area as well. That is significantly important. Great country. And the pursuit of happiness. Assault right of a radical right, but this legislation and how her own reproductive care decisions. A woman, not an extremist, trying to intervene. And where the stakes, that's why this legislation is so important.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, of Happiness for All, great champion out of Oklahoma.
The gentleman is
Oklahoma took immediate action to protect the lives of the unborn. This shouldn't be. Around the world do not allow abortions up to the moment of birth. As this bill would do, it's giving care for pregnant women. I urge every member of this chamber to vote no. You back.
woman reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank the gentleman in for his extraordinary support. Madam Speaker, the right to abortion care is fundamentally wrong. The Supreme Court agreed abortion is, and people will still need to access it. And that's why Dobbs' decision state by state patchwork that denies women. The state of Texas is suing the government to compel women to carry, wants to force rape victims, even 10-year-old girls, to carry pregnancies to term. State governments. And we've got to make reproductive freedom reproductive.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. May I inquire as to how much time is?
The 30 seconds. The gentleman from New Jersey has 4 minutes, 30 seconds.
2 minutes. Life. Dr. Mike Burgess.
And, you know, as we hold this debate, I remember back to that, our major chairman, Jack Pritchard, addressing us and telling us a unique position. Time we took a case as either as a primary doctor or consultant in care of 2 patients, expectancy of over 100 years. He said nowhere else be able to can as an OB-GYN and your pregnancies. Did it before, you'll continue to do it. It's a surgical emergency. Hesitate to do that then or now. A valid good issue from that care. But none of them care at another facility. Stop refuge in my emergency problems from the abortionist. I didn't hesitate to do that, and will continue. Now yield back.
The gentlewoman reserves.
I reserve.
Minute 30 seconds.
I rise today in strong support of the Women's Health Protection, own reproductive health. Supreme Court's Dobbs opinion overturning abortion rights is infuriating. Bear a child or have an abortion was where it belongs, with the person who thought medical care could consequences. Colleagues, make no mistake. Overturning Roe will right to abortion families and individuals who are already struggling and disproportionately against the conception. That's a belief. It's not science, and others do not share it to get an abortion. But you are forcing your beliefs on others, and that is wrong. We need to restore a person back where it belongs for the Women's Health Protection Act. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
To another defender of life from Virginia, Mr. Ben Klein.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. Hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they're only life. Abortion use to end the life of an innocent human being. The government has 73. That is a tragedy. acceptable. And I stand here for the sake of our nation. So let's follow the science. Preborn humans are, in fact, left has decided that accorded human rights depending on their location, level of dependency or size. This nation. I yield back.
The gentlewoman.
Reserved because we have compared to the
gentleman reserves. The gentleman.
Please yield a minute to defender of life from Texas.
The gentleman is recognized for one.
I think the gentleman from Washington, Madam Speaker, rise in opposition to today. I'm voting two bills that go far beyond Roe v. Wade, which is hypes as the Constitution clearly says. Elective abortions up to and including a baby's due date, an extreme position. Legalizing abortion based on the enough for child traffickers to cover up their crimes by forcing victims to receive those who might encourage delaying an abortion, including parents or healthcare providers. Since the overturns have spread misinformation and fear surrounding the decision, presenting the killing of, and I encourage all of my colleagues to vote against these.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield.
The freedom is a constitutional right. I rise today, a 10-year-old rape victim who was denied an abortion and had to run to another state. I stand criminalized. I stand in the name of incest victims. I stand for the Constitution and the Ninth right of women with their faith leaders, their family, make their own decision about Health Protection Act because it prohibits a telling form or that they would perform medically unnecessary procedures like permitted by this particular to ensure that they would comply with credentialing or other conditions for medically comparable services. I stand in order for the Women's Health Protection Act to come. It prevails. I stand because the Supreme Court justices who swore that they believe represent to those that they would adhere to start decisis and bounty hunters are seeking to criminalize and arrest persons.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentlewoman from Washington.
Arizona Committee, Debbie Lesko. 2 minutes.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
H.R. 8296, because Republicans care about women and babies. Attempting to push an on-demand agenda which is beyond actions on demand for any 80% of Americans be illegal in the third trimester. To end the life of the preborn baby or